Hello, my name is Joyce Miller, and I love Greyhounds.
Welcome to the Finding Favorites podcast, where we explore your favorite things without using an algorithm. Here's your host, Leah Jones.
Hello and welcome to Finding Favorites. I'm your host, Leah Jones, and this is the podcast where we learn about people's favorite things and get recommendations without using an algorithm. I am very excited tonight. I am joined by Joyce Miller. Joyce is a writer. She has 2 books out and 1 in the works, a memoir called Look, You're Dancing, a memoir of dogs, dance, and devotion, and historical fiction called Joe Harris, The Moon. Joyce is based in Virginia, I believe, and I am excited to have you here tonight and get to know you. Joyce, how are you?
I am fine. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for sending an email. I love that you pitched yourself for the podcast. Everybody is not so brave.
I've been pitching myself a lot lately because I've been querying agents. So,
And now you'll be able to say, "Look, I'm ready to do your podcast interviews."
Yes.
So when you wrote me, we're going to get into your favorite thing. We're going to talk about your books, but your career, you were a nuclear physicist?
I was a mechanical designer at a nuclear physics laboratory.
How exciting.
For the past, up until I retired in 2019, 32 years, I worked at a physics laboratory in Newport News, Virginia, and we would take the physicists' ideas and have to make them work in the real world.
Yeah. So my undergrad was in chemistry.
Okay.
And I didn't do anything with it other than impress people for many years, because having a science degree, people assume very positive things about you, even when your career is in marketing.
Well, it is a good background. It's a good background for anything, right?
Yeah.
Because the whole world is chemistry and physics.
I did. I always enjoyed physics. I wasn't skilled at it, but I appreciated it that at its base level, it explained what we saw happen in front of us. Like physics explained what was happening, how things were moving around in the world. And I always really appreciated that and then obviously you go further into physics and it starts explaining things you can't see.
Exactly.
I'm curious, when you started down that path and you studied, was it mechanical engineering that became physics, the mechanical designer?
Yes, mechanical engineering and design.
Yeah.
Well, when I was very young, I was good at math and science, but I also liked to draw. But I also loved languages. And so I started college. I went to college for German. And I dropped out for a reason that, has to do with maybe a boyfriend. And then my dad said, you should just go learn a trade. And so I went to a technical school and did architectural drafting because I could draw and have math and science. And the first job that I got was at a company in Pittsburgh, because I grew up in Pittsburgh. A company in Pittsburgh that their drawings had been destroyed in a flood from there's three rivers in Pittsburgh. Of course, this was back before computers. And so because I had really pretty handwriting and they hired me I traced the drawings. Wow. And so that was a vacuum processing company. And then one day I saw a job opening for a German company that made we're going to make vacuum vane pumps in Pittsburgh. And so I applied for that. Well, I had the German background and I had the some vacuum experience then. And so for 5 or 6 years, I worked there translating German drawings into English drawings of vacuum systems. And so then I moved to Virginia, and one day I looked in the newspaper and it said this new accelerator was starting and they needed people with vacuum experience and cryogenics experience. And this job was
Wow.
made for me. And so I went and applied for that and got in there. And then I started doing computer-aided drafting and designing. And also the physicists come from all over the world.
Mm-hmm.
So knowing, some other languages and that kind of thing, it just kind of played all into it. And then I met my husband there, and that's what happened. You just go down a path, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But I always loved the languages and writing. When I was a kid, I liked to write and draw and stuff. And so then when I retired, I decided to write the books.
Great. So perfect transition. Let's talk about Joe Harris' The Moon, which is your historical fiction. And that was the book you published first.
Right.
So what's the story of Joe Harris' The Moon?
Okay. So I retired in 2019, and then in 2020 was the pandemic.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So everything shut down. And so my cousin had done a lot of the research on Joe Harris, who is our granduncle.
Mm-hmm.
And he played baseball in the 1910s and the 1920s against like Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig, and he was in that era.
Mm-hmm.
So he started out, he was working in a coal mine. He was like 12 years old. When you were in 8th grade, you stopped working and you went into the coal mine.
Right.
Of course, he didn't like that, and I'm sure not many people do.
Right.
And so he always was playing baseball, and he got spotted by a scout. He played on some minor league teams, and then he went to play for the Cleveland Indians.
Mm-hmm.
Then World War I happened, and a lot of the baseball players at the time thought they were going to play baseball and entertain the troops, but they enlisted because then they had to fight.
Right.
So he went to France and fought in France and was coming back in, and the armistice was signed. He hitched a ride on an ambulance to go back to his debarkation point, and the ambulance wrecked. And,
oh, no.
Yeah. And this is like, stranger than fiction. You couldn't make stuff up. Anyway, he was very badly injured, but he managed to come back. And of course, there's way more in the book than just that. But he came back to play in 2 World Series, and
wow,
still holds the record for batting average in one of the World Series. So it was a really interesting story of how he made his way back. And like I said, my cousin had done a lot of this research. Mm-hmm. So I'm sitting at home in the pandemic, and I think I saw something online, maybe on Facebook or something, about finding the writer within. And it was like this little free seminar that you could take. And I took that, and I said, this is kind of my idea for a story. I've never written anything. Oh, you can make that into a historical fiction novel. You could do it. And so I got a writing coach, and we worked online through Zoom, and yeah. So and then I self-published it. So
that's fabulous. Your family must be excited to have the story told.
Yes, the story. And the funny thing is that every once in a while, someone will come out of the woodwork and say, oh, I found this book, and I'm your long lost cousin, and it's really true.
Yeah.
They'll trace back the ancestry, and tell me, because there were 9 kids in the family. So there were a lot of kids. And
and potential for a lot of cousins.
Yeah. And then the women, of course, took their husbands' names. And so one of my cousins that I found is actually works for the Pittsburgh Pirates right now. And,
cool.
And his last name is Householder. And so, I didn't make the connection between the Harris and the Householder. But his mom was her grandmother was a Harris that married a house, and then that's how they were. So yeah, these in there, and when they read it, and they're just thrilled that it's out there and pretty closely follows his life. I mean, I did embellish a few things that I didn't know, and I did put a Greyhound in it.
Which people know from the title of this episode is what we will be talking about. Spoilers. Yeah, my great grandpa Jimmy, we called him Grandpa Jimmy.
Mm-hmm.
He also played baseball in that era.
Okay.
And he was a lifelong Reds fan.
Okay.
Of the Cincinnati Reds, but I don't think he actually played for them. I think he was minor league. I don't think he made major league, but I know that we sang Take Me Out to the Ball Game at his funeral.
Aww.
He was buried with his satin Reds jacket, and we ate Double Bubble, I think also was the candy at his funeral.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, what I've learned since writing this book is that, the minor leagues were really important back. Mm-hmm. I mean, the major leagues, pulled from them. I mean, they still do, but back then,
I think it's hard for people to understand how much baseball there was.
Exactly.
There was so much baseball.
Exactly.
It's almost like, right, like at the adult level, it was how Little League is, not quite how Little League is today, but there were so many like local.
Yeah. Every company had a team. Every little town had a team. Mm-hmm. And also it wasn't organized now into the American League and the National League. That didn't come, it came about in Joe's lifetime, but not at the beginning. Mm-hmm. They were just trying to get that off the ground and so, yeah, it was everywhere. Everybody played baseball. Every kid wanted to play baseball. And
yeah. Well, hopefully somebody with a little shop across the street from where the Pittsburgh Pirates play today that's listening to this, they should put this in their bookstore.
They should.
This would be it seems to me like something that would be great to have next to the register across the street from the field. Uh-huh. So I'm going to put that out there for you.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. And then your second book, Look, You're Dancing. Mm-hmm. Tell me about that one. So this one is the memoir.
This is a memoir about my last 20 years doing Greyhound adoption. So I had a mixed breed dog that I trained. That was the first dog I ever trained. And I wanted to train her to do some dog sport. And I had a woman who trained with me that mentored me. But at the time, mixed breed dogs couldn't participate in AKC sports.
Okay.
Like agility they didn't have rally then, but agility, they couldn't do agility or obedience. They had to be a purebred dog. And so she said, well, we could try this thing called canine freestyle. They do it in Europe and in the UK. Mm-hmm. And it's called dog dancing, and you can do it, and it's not sanctioned by the AKC. And so you could do it with your dog. So we trained. She had a little pug, and I had this mixed breed dog that looked like a black lab to do dog dancing, which was you train the dog to do some tricks like to spin around you and circle around you or weave through your legs and things like that. And then you choreograph that to a piece of music so that you cue the dog when something happens in the music, and it looks like you and the dog are dancing.
How fun.
And it's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
And it really bonds you with the dog. But as we know, dogs don't live as long as we want them to live. And so Daisy, that was the dog I had, got sick and passed away. And so I needed to find another dog to do my dog dancing with. So I'm a big woman, I'm tall, and I thought, well, you know what? I'm going to try a Greyhound because, there's thousands of them, and they need to find homes for them. So I called up the person in Richmond who had something on the web about, that he did Greyhound adoption and placed Greyhounds. And, I called him up and said that this is what I want to do with this dog.
Yep.
And I'm sure he thought I was crazy.
Looking for your dog with the most dancing potential.
And he said, I'm going to check around at the tracks and I'm going to see what I can find for you. And then he called me back and first he called all my neighbors or the people. You had to give references to get a Greyhound. And this was back, 20 years ago, early 90s. And he said that I got good references. So he found this young, not quite 2-year-old Greyhound. And he said, I think she would work for you. And so I went and picked her up in Richmond, brought her home, and didn't realize how hard it would be to train her to do the tricks because mostly Greyhounds run or sleep.
Right. Yeah, they're sprinters.
They're sprinters.
And nappers.
And nappers and big nappers. And it took me a while to train her to do the tricks that she needed to do. Well, she was very food motivated, which helped me. And I found that she absolutely loved salmon. So I could cut up little pieces of salmon and I could pretty much get her to do everything I needed her to do after that. So then I trained her. And then, of course, again, I had her for 9 years, but still that wasn't enough time. And so then I decided I would get a Greyhound puppy. And sometimes at the tracks at the time, if they had a litter of puppies that they didn't witness the breeding, they couldn't register them for racing.
Okay.
And so they would, call the litter. And so our adoption group took all 5 puppies and placed them with people who wanted Greyhound puppies. And I thought that would be easier. However,
something about your tone suggests it was not easier, Joyce, to start with a puppy.
It was like training a velociraptor. So, yeah, but I did train him. So, and I named him Sammy Davis Jr. because I knew he was going to be a dancer. Yeah. So I had to train, he did the typical, puppy things like chew things up and all that kind of stuff. So I had to train that out and train the dog dancing moves in, but eventually I did. And we did some competitions, and the competitions can be compared to pairs ice skating.
Okay.
So you get a technical score and you get a artistic score. And the different levels there's different technical moves you have to do to move up in the ranks.
Yep.
When you start out, if they just follow you and sit, then they're okay. That counts. And then it gets more complicated and they have to do distance moves away from you. And then your costume has to match the music for your artistic score. So anyway, we did compete a couple times and he did take first place. So.
Oh, well done, Sammy. So in the book, Look, You're Dancing, people can get the story of like more in depth about your life dancing with your dogs.
More in depth about the dog dancing, but also more about Greyhounds and Greyhound adoption, because I did get sucked into the Greyhound adoption world when I had my first one, who's Kit. And when I got her, then I started volunteering with the adoption group. And at the time, I lived in Hampton, Virginia. The adoption group was in Richmond, Virginia, where I live now. But it's about 90 miles away. And so if they had adopters closer to where I lived, I would go and do their home visits for them. And you would be surprised, or maybe you wouldn't, but people tell you some really strange things and show you some really strange things when you go into their homes to
Right.
To check out their homes just to, I'm like, it'll be a half an hour. I just want to make sure you have a fence. If you say you have a fence and there are no holes in the fence that the dog could get through,
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to show you the things that if you have too many steps or see greyhounds live on a
They
flat.
have bad hips, don't they?
No, their hips are fine, but they live on a flat plane. They at the racetrack, they are in, kennels and they, are on the floor, and then they go out and they race on the flat sandy track, and they don't ever go up and down steps. They can do it. You can teach them to do it, but some steps will like really freak them out.
Yeah.
Like, especially like steps that are open. They may never do those steps. They just won't. And so one of the first houses that I went on a home visit was in Virginia Beach, and it was on the sand, and it had those poles, that go down to the sand. And they had about 60 wooden deck steps to get up into their house. And and the people were like, this is how you get in. And I said, and I had Kit at the time, and I said, she's not going to go up those steps, and no greyhound's going to go up all those steps. They're just not. And so the people were like, well, but other dogs do it, and
other dogs do.
And so perhaps you should get another dog. But and the guy said, but I'll carry the dog up and down. And I said, you'll carry it for 2 weeks, and there's 75-pound dogs, and then you'll be calling me saying, come and get this dog because I can't carry it up and down the steps one more time.
Right.
So anyway, so those were the kind of things I would have to turn people down,
right,
for adopting, because that is exactly what would happen. And you take this dog from the racetrack and you put them in a house, and you want them to live there forever. You don't want them to live there for a couple months and then get put in another house. It's disruptive for the dog and disruptive for the people. So, yeah.
So let's talk about, Kit was your first greyhound.
Kit, mm-hmm.
And you said it was Daisy had passed away, and you wanted a tall dog to dance with.
Yeah, and that was Kit.
Mm-hmm. And how long after you adopted Kit did you say, well, are you a one greyhound at a time house?
No. No.
You're one dancer at a time.
One dancer, and, many foster fails. Let me say that.
Yep.
So yeah, then there was this old greyhound, like 11 years old. And the guy that ran the group, he said, could I come and get her and keep her at my house? He's like, as soon as we find someone to take her, we're not even going to charge them any money. We just want her to have a nice place because she's, going to die in 6 months. So let's just find her a good place. And so I took her home. She was a basket case because she had lived her whole life in the kennel.
At the racetrack?
Yes.
For 11 years. Wow.
Oh, yeah. But people you would think that, okay, so now she's going to come and live in a house and she's going to love it. But no.
Because you move her out of her safe cage, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
She didn't have her spot, and there were ceiling fans, and there was a reflection of another dog in the stove, and everything was weird for her. So yeah, it took a week or two to get her to calm down in my house. And then there's a story about it in the book, but a woman came and wanted her, and it was not an ideal situation.
Yeah.
And so I just called the guy and said, I'm going to keep her. And so then I had Kit to dance with, and I had Rosie, who lived to be over 14 years old.
Wow.
But she was just this old, I walked her every day, but that was it. She certainly was not dog dancing material. didn't want to, and I wouldn't have made her.
Yeah. I'm curious, what is it about the Greyhounds temperament, or what is it about Greyhounds that has really, it's become your breed?
So, well, they're very cat-like, I have to tell you that.
Mm-hmm.
And they are very bonded to you. And probably, I don't know if it comes from the racing background. Racing has good and bad, right?
Mm-hmm.
I won't say it's completely bad. It's not great either, but the trainers who work with them when they're young, they get very attached to, and also they keep them with their litter mates until they're like 18 months old. And
Wow.
yeah, and most dogs get separated from their mothers when they're a few weeks old, right?
Right.
And so it just makes them have a temperament that's just very easygoing. And I think they're beautiful also.
Mm-hmm.
They come in every color, you know,
Yep.
and I just, that's what makes them my breed. I just
Yeah.
fell in love with them from the time I had my first one.
Yeah. So first you get Kit, and then who was your senior foster fail?
So her name was Rosie,
Rosie.
Miss Betsy Rose.
Oh.
So they all have race names too, along with their call name. So they get really weird race names sometimes. So Kit's was A Bar Kit, and the kennel name was A Bar BAR. I don't know where that came from, but all the dogs in her litter and subsequent litters only had 3-letter names. So there was A Bar Kit and A Bar Mo and A Bar Owl, and so
Okay.
and then Ms.
I
Betsy.
guess when you're naming that many dogs, you have to come up with systems.
Exactly. And
Yeah.
so after and Rosie was Ms. Betsy Rose, and then I had Radar, and his race name was WS Free Fallen. Um, and Radar was another foster fail who he was placed with a police officer and a physical therapist, and they worked opposite shifts. So one worked at night, one worked during the day.
Mm-hmm.
So he spent a lot of time in their laundry room, which was good and bad, but greyhounds also have super paper thin skin, and he was wagging his tail in the laundry room and bumped his tail on the washing machine and got what we call happy tail, which is like he just was bleeding and
Mm-hmm.
wagging his tail.
Oh,
And
no.
when the policeman came home from his shift and opened the laundry room door, he was like, he couldn't take it.
Everything was covered in blood.
Everything was covered in blood. And so I had to go and get Radar, and they named him Radar because he was a police officer.
Mm-hmm.
And the policeman, he was really distraught when I went to pick him up, but he was like, I can't do it.
I imagine it was very emotionally upsetting to walk into what looks like a crime scene when you're a police officer.
Exactly.
At home.
In your own house.
Yeah, like am I going to find my wife's body? Like, right? Like I can very quickly imagine the complete meltdown he had. So I get it.
Yeah. Me too. I mean,
yeah.
So then I was, and I ended up keeping Radar, and Radar had kind of a mane on the back of his neck like a horse.
Mm-hmm.
He was kind of unusual looking. And then after Radar, I got Sammy, which was the puppy, because by that time Kit had passed away, and then I didn't need one, but I wanted another.
You wanted to continue dancing.
I wanted to continue dancing, and Radar wasn't the best suited for it either.
Mm-hmm.
So I got the puppy, trained the puppy, and then Radar passed away, and then I got PG Hairspray, and all her kennel mates were named after PG movies. So it was
cute.
PG Inkheart, PG Footloose, and so she was PG Hairspray, and I just kept the PG part.
Mm-hmm.
The little brindle girl. I did train her to be a therapy dog, but she didn't dance because Sammy was the dancer.
Yeah.
And then Sammy passed away, and then I got my greyhound that I have now, which is Coheed, which is up there with the dancing picture. And I trained him to do a few things, but we haven't done any kind of competitions or anything. But he does know a few of the tricks.
Yeah.
And he's my only one now, because now that PG passed away and now that I live in a condo, I'm only allowed to have one. So
yeah,
I have Coheed and he's it.
Yeah. So you mentioned Happy Tail. The injury has the name Happy Tail because this is something that like greyhounds will just get so excited and they smack their tail, and it's just something to be aware of.
Yes, that's one of the things that happens to them, and there's nothing happy about it, but that does happen to them. And like I said, they have like this paper thin skin. It tears real easily, and that's why they wear the muzzles when they race, because they will get excited and nip each other, and then you have a ripped piece of skin on a shoulder or a neck or something, and you have to get stitches or staples or whatever. And so, yeah.
What are some of the other maybe oddities or things that people should know about greyhounds before they run out and get one?
Right.
What are the things you wish? So no stairs, definitely no open stairs.
No stairs. Not, like I said, you can train them to do stairs, but usually no stairs. You want all the people in the family to be vested. That's one thing when you're placing one for adoption.
Is that because they're pack animals and everybody in the house needs to be ready to cuddle this
and
big cat.
And they live with other dogs and people. So when they're at the racetrack, there's usually 60 dogs to a building where the kennels are, and they're never by themselves. There's always a dog in the cage on either side of them, and then the trainers are in there and they play the radio, and it's just noisy and boisterous, and that's what they're used to. So if they go to, and again, they can be trained to go into a house with, just one person, but it's not always ideal. And I think that's why a lot of times you see people who adopt them, they usually have more than one. It's easier for the dogs when there's more than one. But now there's only 2 racetracks left in the United States.
Right.
And they're in West Virginia. And so our adoption group still does get dogs from them. And they now they farm them out all the way from up to Maine down to Florida. The old adoption groups that had tracks in those states, now they get them from our adoption group, and then they adopt them out. But there's not nearly the numbers. When I first started in, many, many years ago, there were like 30,000 a year that were available for adoption. And if they couldn't adopt them out, they would just euthanize them. And so there's been a lot more education. Of course, now that people have, voted to close down the tracks and stuff, so there's not the need that there used to be for people to adopt them.
So with the tracks closing, is the population of greyhounds also starting to shrink?
Yes. Yeah. And the people who love them and love the breed wonder what's going to happen to the breed now. And so there's a difference in the ones that they breed for racing versus the ones they breed for AKC conformation. They look different. They have different kind of slopes to their backs. The racing greyhounds have great big butts. And
to come off the starting block,
push away. And so, the people who adopt them, they're just wondering now, what's going to happen. There are a lot of farms that, out in Kansas in particular, that raised a lot of the racing greyhounds. And, what happens to them? The trainers who worked at the tracks, they're just out of jobs. And the thing that changed the racetracks was the fact that they let people gamble on lotteries. And so they didn't, before every state had a lottery, scratch off tickets and all that kind of stuff. People would go and bet on dogs and bet on horses, and now they don't have to do that anymore. And so when the money stopped coming in from people coming to the tracks or going to off-track betting, then the tracks couldn't take care of the actual track, the sand. They wouldn't have the money to take care of it, and so there'd be like holes in the track, and the dogs would step in the holes and then break legs and things like that. And so then it went downhill. And it isn't necessarily that the racetrack owners were these horrible people.
Right.
They just were stuck in these financial circumstances where they, the money wasn't coming in. And so that's what happened.
So within your adoption groups and your Greyhound community in Virginia, do you do meetups? Do you what is life? What is the community life for a Greyhound owner?
So it used to be much more. There are meetups usually once a month at like a PetSmart or something. And a couple people will bring their Greyhounds, and then so that other people can see how big they are and that kind of stuff, if they want to adopt one themselves. And then we have picnics once a year, our group does, and everybody brings their dog, and we do, play fun games with them, and they do this thing called they roo. So it's not exactly a bark, and it's kind of like a howl.
Okay.
And you just have to get one started, and then they all do it.
Kind of like Huskies. Huskies will do that too, won't they?
Yes. And so, if you have 120 dogs at this dog picnic and you get one started, and then they all go, and then somebody's videotaping it with their camera,
Fun.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
And there's also national get-togethers. I think the most famous one is in October. It's called Greyhounds Reach the Beach, and it is in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware.
Okay. Yep.
Hundreds of dogs, owners and their dogs, go to that, and they set up like a marketplace, and people sell collars and coats and all things Greyhound, T-shirts and scarves.
You have a very lovely scarf with Greyhounds on it.
And they used to do an event in Virginia, which was called Greyhounds. We went to Northern Virginia, where there are a lot of wineries, and it was on Mother's Day weekend, and it was my favorite thing to do for Mother's Day.
Fabulous.
And you would go from winery to winery and do tastings and dogs in tow, and you would be at a winery and look out on the hillside, and there'd be blankets with Greyhounds all over it, like a patchwork quilt.
So you mentioned the Greyhounds love a nap. When they're retired from racing, or they were racing, they're from the racing side of the family tree. Do you also need to take them on one sprint a day, or do you need to tire them out with a run? Or
not exactly. So they do like to run, of course. So they do something we call zoomies. I would say they need to do that about once a week.
Okay.
But not every day. But every day they do love a good walk. They like to smell things and pee on things. And
of course. Keep in touch with the neighborhood gossip.
Yes, keep in touch with the neighborhood gossip. And so, definitely they need a little walk out around the neighborhood. But the zoomies, they only need to do once a week or every 10 days or so. So I take Coheed, my dog that I have now, since I live in a condo. I take him to there's a little dog park by our house. Although I'm not a fan of dog parks, but I take him when there's usually no one else in there.
Yeah.
And he just zips around and 3 or 4 times, and then, okay, I'm done. He goes to the fence and let me
I
out.
mean, that's kind of me. I go to Pilates once a week.
See?
Maybe I'm a greyhound.
Maybe you're a greyhound.
I'm tall. I love to nap.
How about dancing?
I can be convinced to dance.
Okay,
Also.
there you go.
Yeah. Yep. And I was a terror when I was a puppy. Wait,
Oh.
what? No. Are there greyhounds in pop culture? I'm trying to think if there are any good movies with greyhounds in them.
Oh, I don't think so
Yeah.
so much, but in a way, I'm kind of happy about that because, you always hear about like when they play 101 Dalmatians, then everybody goes out and gets a Dalmatian and then they end up in the shelters, or Legally Blonde, everybody goes out and gets Chihuahua and then they're all in the shelters. So in a way, I'm kind of happy there's not a pup. Although a lot of well, not a lot. Some, like Paul McCartney had a greyhound.
Yeah.
Some famous people have had them. So
yeah.
J.K. Rowling, who wrote, all the Harry Potter,
Yeah.
she has greyhounds. So yeah, they're out there. That's for sure.
I love it. Is there anything I haven't asked you about greyhounds that you think people should know?
They're just, I mean, I know I'm biased, but they're just a wonderful breed, and they're just so loving and attentive, and they make great pets. Like I said, they're like cats in their demeanor. And so they're easy to have in an apartment and easy to have in almost any home, as long as you don't have a lot of steps.
Yeah.
And so yeah, I just think they're great.
I had a friend who had 2 Italian greyhounds, and they are cat-sized. And greyhound attitude and build. And they were fantastic. You go over there and it's like, "Oh, is it couch time? We're all just gonna cuddle on the couch now."
Yeah, and they have to wear their little sweaters when it's cold like this. So yeah, I guess that's something that you have to know about them. They do need to have a coat when it's cold.
Yeah, they're not a outdoor farming herding
No.
dog.
But people, people have them in Chicago, and
Sure, yeah.
just put the coats on them and take them out.
Yeah. I guess knowing that they need Zoomies once a week and that they're happy to nap helps me. When I see greyhounds in Chicago, I'm just like, what are you doing? How could you how much torture to have a big dog in an apartment? But the greyhound in particular is fit for that life.
Exactly. And the funny thing about when we moved to this condo, the board had to meet our greyhound before we could buy the condo. And they're like, we really like dogs that are under 20 pounds. So we moved in, and now, we've been here a couple years now, and all the people in our building are like, your dog is the best dog ever. Doesn't bark. We never hear him. The little 20-pound yappers are keeping us awake at night, and
they're scritching back and forth on their on the floor.
Bark every time you walk past the hall, down the hall. There's barking at the door. Your dog doesn't make a sound. Quiet, sleeps all.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, maybe you ought to think about that when you're making the rules, people.
Yeah. Make it a greyhound only condo.
Greyhound only. So it really doesn't matter that he's big and he's 80 pounds, because he's quiet. And yeah. That is one thing I guess I should say, is that they are not guard dogs. They don't bark. They don't. If someone wanted to come in here and take our TV, he might lift his head up off the couch.
Maybe.
Yeah.
Like, do you have salmon in your pocket? You don't? All right.
Okay.
I'll stay here.
I'll just lay here and you go ahead, take the TV. Do you want the other stuff too?
Yeah. Can I interest you in a DVR? Would you like to know where the jewelry is? No. Joyce, you mentioned before I hit record that now you've written your 3rd book and you're out there meeting agents now.
Yeah, querying agents, yes.
Querying agents. What's the synopsis of your new book?
So my new book is tentatively titled Corinne, and it is also historical fiction. It's based on the true story of Corinne Melchers. So I live in Virginia now, but I told you I grew up in Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
And so I would drive back and forth on Interstate 95 to go home.
Yep.
And there was this brown sign on the interstate, there for attractions. And it was Gary Melcher's home and studio. And I would see that sign all the time. And I thought, who is Gary Melchers?
Yeah.
I have no idea who this is. And I thought, well, is it like a Civil War guy? Because Virginia's big in the Civil War. So one day I stopped, and Gary Melchers was this 20th century artist, very famous artist, realism and a little bit of impressionist.
Mm-hmm.
And so he owned this house in Virginia called Belmont. But Corinne was his wife, and she was also an artist. So when I did the tour of the house, there are 6 paintings in the house that were Corinne's. And so, there's a story there, I'm thinking. So I went to the gift shop and asked if they had a book about her, and they said no. And then I said, well, do you have anything about him, Gary Melchers? No. So I thought, I have to write her story. I have to write her story from her point of view. So that's my new book that I just finished, because I think, I told you I always like to draw and I'm interested in art. So I just was, Gary Melchers, like I said, he was on par with John Singer Sargent.
Yeah.
Whistler, like they were at the same time.
Yeah.
But no one, you've never heard of Gary Melchers, have you?
No.
So, and he was very prolific painter. He painted a portrait of Mark Twain. He painted a portrait of Theodore Roosevelt when he was in the White House. But I wanted to tell Corinne's story because I feel like, because of the time she was born in, she could have been as famous as John Singer Sargent, but they were not given that opportunity. Yeah. And the best she could hope for was to be a famous artist's wife. Mm-hmm. And so wanted to tell her story. So that's what I did. And it's based on fact, but I also embellished that one also and gave her a greyhound.
Outstanding.
She was a real animal lover. She had a parrot.
Nice.
Named Polly too. She had many dogs. She loved animals, and so anyway, so
one of them being a greyhound is within reason.
It's within reason, and I know a lot about greyhounds. So you're supposed to write what you know. And
outstanding.
So I'm hoping that an agent picks it up and I can get it published. And if I try for a little bit longer and it doesn't work out, then I'll probably publish it myself, like I did the first 2, so that I get it out there. Because I think, again, like you said, the Joe Harris book needs to be in across from the stadium.
Yeah.
So the gift shop at their house needs a book about her.
Yeah. Yeah. How do you have a house museum without a book?
Exactly.
I can't wait. Do they know that you've written it yet?
I talked to the curator about it. So I don't, they don't know how far along it is yet.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How exciting.
Yeah.
Well, Joyce, it's been so nice to get to know you this evening. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. And this was great.
Where can people find you on the internet?
So I do have a website, joyceamiller.com. So they can find me there. I'm also on Instagram, and there's connection on my website to my Instagram.
Outstanding. You can follow Finding Favorites on Instagram, Finding Faves Pod, no E on the faves. You can send me an email, findingfavoritspodcast@gmail.com. If like Joyce, you want to be brave and pitch yourself as a guest, I am always looking for new people. Please rate and review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Good Pods, or wherever you're listening to podcasts. And Joyce, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Finding Favorites with Leah Jones. Please make sure to subscribe and drop us a 5-star review on iTunes. Now, go out and enjoy your favorite things.